I just want to run you through some other things that deal with rendering. It'll be helpful, I think. And right here, you'll see it in your layers. If I just kind of close the name down a little bit, you'll see that there's a lot more information here. The one I'm actually interested in dealing with is material. And so now you can actually start to apply materials to your surface, your layers. So for instance, our pipes, we can add a material to it. So I'm just going to click the circle here, and it's going to bring up a layer material dialog box. You could go online and find material images that are meant for this kind of stuff, but for now we're not going to deal with that. Like for instance, you could find an image of a piece of steel that is meant for rendering. They're called textures. But for now, let's just do a very simple idea of maybe that was steel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually choose a color, and I'll do like a light gray-ish color, and I'm just going to actually keep it at light gray. I'm going to hit OK. So I've changed the color, and then now we have some other options underneath that. And it asks about gloss, reflectivity, and transparency. So if you're dealing with windows, anything that's a glazing, something that you can actually see through, you're definitely going to want to bump up your transparency. And you'll notice the little reference image here changes with it, and you'll see it goes from being solid to extremely transparent. And so that kind of gives you an idea of how transparent something would be. Now, know that glass isn't 100% transparent. It does have some other factors that are involved, like such as reflectivity. And so these are certain characteristics based off of materials. So steel is not transparent, right? So I'm going to keep that at 0. Although steel does do a little bit of reflectivity, so I'm going to maybe put that around 30, and that may be too much. The best thing to do is to check it. And you can actually name your material here, so I could change the name of this and say steel. And then when you go down here, this is another area where you can start to add textures as well. This is a little more advanced, so we're not going to get into it. But I will show you. And then there's also advanced settings, and so this has to deal with the actual environment itself. As far as textures go, you could add a texture color, a transparency, and a bump. So what a bump is you take an image that is pretty much just black and white that would look like an actual physical texture. So maybe it has bumps. So you take a pattern and then you apply it to that surface, and it'll actually create that pattern as a three-dimensional texture for your material. So it's a little bit advanced, and it's not the easiest thing to work with. You definitely have to have the right image to bring in for that. So I'm not going to deal with that today. I just wanted to sort of talk about it a little bit so you kind of know what these texture things are for. And yeah, this is just simple information here if you wanted to create a new material and or if you wanted to duplicate a material. So as of right now, I just changed the color to light gray, and I changed the reflectivity to 30. And I'm just going to hit OK. And you'll notice there's a slight change in the pipes. One thing I'm going to do a quick rendering, so I'm going to bring it back down to 640 and 72 and normal, just so I can get a quick rendering here for us. And so now that I'm going to render this, hopefully it comes out fairly quickly. And it looks like that light gray wasn't dark enough. But one thing we will notice right here is we are starting to get a little bit of shine, right? A little bit of sheen to it. So maybe that light gray wasn't quite dark enough. So I'm going to go back to the steel. I'm going to change the color to gray instead of light gray and hit OK. And I'll just check the rendering again, and let's see if maybe it's a little bit closer. So it's getting a little bit darker. You notice the sun is turning it yellow. So that might also be interfering with our color choice. But you can still see sort of that reflectivity that's happening. So that's good. So I'm going to actually just go ahead and make this color even darker, and let's see if it gives us something different. You'll notice that it changed significantly in the model. So I'm going to go to render again. And now you see that gray color is actually affected. So maybe that was too dark, right? So it's really just kind of playing around with it, making sure your rendering settings are very quick. So that way it'll just shoot it out and you can see it really fast. And I do like the amount of reflectivity that I'm getting, but that color just isn't right still. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to bump it up a little bit. And I'm actually going to spin this wheel around because to me, I feel like a bluer color would be nice. And I'm going to lighten it like so. And hit OK. And I'm going to see what this looks like. So to me, that's still too dark. So really, it's just about finding that sweet spot. So let's check that out. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually change my reflectivity to even higher, and let's see what it shows us now. So now you notice since I turned the reflectivity up really high, this one pipe right here is starting to actually glow. All right? So it's getting a lot of light and it's reflecting a lot of light back. And that's actually muddying up and making the image not look as nice. So I think where I had the reflectivity was good. So I'm actually going to keep it back at 30. And I sort of found the color that I like too. So I'm going to keep that like that. Now let's say for our lofted surfaces, we want to add a color to that as well. And let's say just for now, let's make it sort of look like what glass would look like. So let's see if we can achieve something like that. So I'm going to go somewhere here where it's a little bit white, a little bit cyan. Hit OK. I'm going to take the transparency up to about 65. We're going to definitely have some reflectivity there. So I'll keep that at 25. And I will now check the rendering again. You notice now it's going to take 3 minutes. And that's because as soon as you start to add reflectivity, transparency, change the color of it, it starts to take a little bit longer because it's having to calculate all that new information. So you can see if you add materials to everything, bump up the amount of resolution, the amount of DPI, the amount of anti-aliasing, and all these things, it could take upwards of 30 minutes to an hour to render something. In Rhino Render, or with Rhino Render, nothing should really take longer than 30 minutes. There are some programs like Maxwell that's just strictly a rendering program where you could hit render, walk away from it, come back in a day, and it'll still be rendering. Maxwell. Yeah. Studio Max is the same way. It could just render forever. So it's really when you just decide to stop it and say, this is the quality I want. So now we looked at this, and you notice there's a lot of craziness going on in it, and that's because it's reflecting the other surfaces around it, and it's also transparent, so you're seeing through surfaces, right? This is all as a result of the reflection of these other surfaces here from the sun. And so that's why it looks a little bit crazy right here. But if you just look at like one area right here where there's not so much of that going on, you'll see that it's starting to look a little bit like what glass might look like. And so that's just an example of adding materiality to your model. I'm going to go ahead and not allow it to be transparent. And I'm going to take this and I'm just going to add a really light gray to it. And I'm going to just make the reflectivity only around 5. So I'm going to hit render for that one. Let's see what kind of result it produces for us. So there we go. We got a little bit of reflectivity on the outside, and we've added sort of a slight gray color to it. It's still really reading from the sunlight. And that's a completed version of that.